Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Today, we're checking out a new mixing console and audio interface from SSL. Let's get started. Today we're looking at the SSL Big Six, a combination of an analog mixing console and a USB audio interface. It's a very versatile mixer that provides a lot of capability for your studio. And in fact, I was thinking about this as I've been using this in my studio here. You know, a mixer is something that you don't miss until you don't have it and then you bring it back again. And all of a sudden you realize just how useful it is to have a console like this in your studio. It provides a great solution for summing, of course, but it's also a very versatile solution for just plugging something in and monitoring it, for tracking. When you're mixing, of course, when you're editing in your DAW, you can bring things up and down. And as we'll see, there are a lot of different capabilities inside this console that provide a very nice workflow when you're creating music in your studio. I've been using the SSL 6 console for quite a while in my studio now, actually ever since it came out, and I found it to be very useful. But with the Big Six, things are on an entirely new level because we have so many more inputs and outputs. We've got 16 analog inputs available here. We've got a 16-channel audio interface that goes back and forth with your DAW in your computer. We've got 2 effect sends. We've got onboard EQ. We've got all sorts of routing, a complete master section. Let's take a closer look at what's going on with the Big Six console. I sort of think of the Big Six as having 3 sections, or really 4 sections, as we'll see. The first is these first 4 channels here, which are mono input channels. These are SuperAnalogue inputs, and they're very full-featured. If we start at the top of the channel strip, we've got XLR and quarter-inch inputs, and those support line, instrument, as well as microphone level signals. We've got a high-pass filter, 48-volt phantom power, and switches for selecting the different levels that we're inputting, mic, line, and instrument. For setting the actual input for the channel, we have a switch here that says from USB. Now, when that switch is up, we're using the analog path through, so we're plugging into the input and coming through a path as you'd normally use the mixer. When you push that down, the signal will come back from the computer, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. We've also got a polarity invert switch here, and we've got a gain control for the analog input. Next up on these channels, we have 2 cue or effect sends. They have a pan control, they have a level control, and we can engage those or disengage those with this switch. Now, an important feature is this pre-post switch. When this switch is up, it's in pre-mode, which means that the signal is taken pre-fader. And this is where you typically use it for a headphone feed or for a monitor feed. When it's down, we're in post, which means that the signal is taken after the fader, and this is typically how you'd use it as an effect send. Now, an interesting thing here is that it's possible to route these out through USB, so you can access plugins inside your computer and bring those back in when you're tracking. So you could, for example, use this to put delay or reverb on a vocal as you're tracking. Continuing down the channel strip, we have a 3-band EQ on each of these 4 channels. Now, the high and low bands are switchable from shelving to bell shape. We have a mid-band as well, and then we can engage or disengage the EQ per channel. Each channel also has a channel compressor. It's a single knob compressor with threshold control. We've got a meter here for it, and we can engage that or disengage that. A really nice feature to be able to add a touch of compression as you're tracking. Of course, each channel has a pan control. We've got a 100mm fader. We've got a mute switch, and that has an extra function. When we push that in, it mutes the signal out of the main bus, but it actually routes it to bus B, which is an alternate output. There's actually an output for that on the back panel, so you could create an entirely second mix and send it to an additional destination. Pre-fade listen allows us to solo the channel, and we have 2 other important switches here. One is insert. Now, when insert is engaged, we access the insert point that's on the back panel. Each of these 4 channels has a balanced insert, separate input and output, so you can access external gear as you're tracking or as you're mixing. The last switch on each of these channels is USB out post fader. What this does is tap the signal after the fader and send it out via USB so you can record it into your DAW. This allows you to record directly out from the channel without passing through the rest of the Big Six's signal path. So that's our first 4 channels. All of those are identical. Our second set of 4 channels here are stereo inputs. So we've got 8 inputs feeding these 4 faders. Beginning at the top of the channel strip, we can again choose to bring the signal in either via the analog inputs on the back panel or via USB for summing. We can mono these channels if we're bringing a single channel in, and of course we have a trim control for setting the input level for each of those channels. We have our 2 cue or effect sends for each of these channels. 3-band EQ. In this case, we have a high shelving, low shelving, mid-band, and a bypass or engage switch. We've got a balance control for the stereo image, 100mm fader, and again, we've got our mute bus B switches, solo or PFL, and our USB out switch. The third section of the console is the master section, which is over here on my right. A lot of controls here, but this is where we set up our cue sends, our headphone mixes, our main out, our monitor controls, and those sorts of things. So if we begin at the top, we have two more stereo inputs here for external inputs. So you could bring a music player in there. You could also use that for any line input, like a keyboard. Or by pushing these switches, we can bring two additional stereo signals back from the DAW for summing. We also have our talkback here at the top. We have 48-volt phantom power, so we can use a condenser microphone with that. And we've got our two headphone outputs here on the top as well. Talkback level is set here. An important part of this section is the G Series bus compressor located right here. Now the SSL compressor, of course, is legendary for its ability to glue together a mix, and you have all of that sonic goodness, if you will, right here in the Big Six console as well. We've got a threshold control, we've got makeup gain, you can choose auto release or not, we've got a meter, and then of course you can engage or bypass the compressor. Next up, we have our cue master section. So here we can route the cue to USB 9 and 10 or USB 11 and 12 for Q1 and 2. We can choose to monitor external 1, external 2, and we also have control over the level of those two stereo cues or effect sends. Our two headphone outs are controlled here. We can choose the source as well as the level for the headphones, and our monitor setup is here. Now we have control over the level of those two coming external inputs here, and we can choose what we're monitoring, external 1, external 2, main, or bus B, that second alternate mix. At the bottom of the master section, we have our monitor controls. So we can choose between two sets of monitors. We have main monitor outs, and we also have an alternate monitor out, and you select that with this switch. We can mono the monitors for checking phase coherency. And we've got a dim control. Now dim allows you to reduce the level of the monitors by hitting this switch, and you can actually set that level right here. We can also mute the monitors, and we have monitor level control. On the far right, this is an important LED here because it shows us that USB is connected up to the computer. We've got our stereo meters. Next up, we have level control for the bus B master. That's that alternate mix out. And we can mute that and send to USB as well. Finally, we have our master fader here, 100mm fader, and we can choose the source for that, external 1, external 2, or 2 returns coming back from USB. We have an insert for this as well. So on the back panel, we've got a balanced send, a balanced return. We can engage or bypass that here. We can also choose to route stereo cue through the compressor and then sum it into the main bus. So lots of controls here on the face of the mixer, but like all mixers, once you understand one channel strip, you've got these 4 figured out. Understand this channel strip, you've got these 4 figured out in our master section. So very easy to operate and a lot of flexibility for creating mixes and routing your signals. Now let's jump back and take a look at the back panel of the Big Six. We've got a lot of I/O going on with this mixer. Beginning on the far right, we have the 4 balanced inserts for channels 1 through 4. We have a balanced send and a balanced return for each of those channels. Next up, we have the 4 balanced stereo inputs for channels 5 through 12. We can also choose to bring the output of an external summing mixer into the main bus of the Big Six and combine it with what's going on the front panel. And we do that using the next set of inputs. Following that, we have our 2 stereo cue outputs. And then we have our 2 stereo monitor outputs. Next up is the bus B output. That's that alternate mix that we've talked about several times. And then we have the inserts for the main bus. And finally, we have our main stereo outputs. The rest of the panel includes the USB-C connector, and the Big Six is compatible with USB-C. It's USB 2.0 compatible, it's class compliant, so you can plug it in using a USB-A cable or a USB-C cable, and both of those are included with the Big Six. And finally, we have the power switch and the power connector. So I've been working with the Big Six quite a bit, and I've got a mix set up here. What I'm doing is I'm bringing back channels from PreSonus Studio One through the Big Six and using it to mix everything and send it out the main outs. So now I have access to EQ, I've got access to the compressors and so on. It's a really great way to mix. So let's take a look at this. If we play back the signal, of course, nothing's going to come in. I've got everything set for USB return coming back from the computer, and I've assigned the outputs for the channels inside the DAW to the separate outputs so they'll come back on individual channels. So when I play this back, I've got guitar on channel 1, for example. Channel 2 I'm not using. Channel 3 is my bass. We can choose to EQ that. Little guitar there. Let's make that brighter. Drums. Keyboards. This is a return from a stereo reverb in the DAW. And a delay for the guitar. could choose to use the two Q sends to either send out a headphone mix to a musician if we're overdubbing, or again, I could route that through my DAW and add effects in there, or I could access an external piece of processing gear, a reverb, a delay, or whatever, bring it back around through. But a nice touch is being able to both compress on the individual channels for those first 4 inputs, as well as use the stereo bus compressor. Now the nice thing here is that once I have everything set up in my DAW to route back in, and I've got my switches depressed up here, I never had to look at my DAW again. I was doing everything right here on the mixing console. The EQ, adding the compression, the bus compressor, setting my levels and so on. It's all done with your focus right here, which allows you to keep your ears on what's happening in your mix rather than using your eyes on your DAW. I find it's a great way to work. And the Big Six has a big advantage because it's so easy to get around on, yet it also has so much capability packed into a compact package. I hope you've enjoyed this look at the SSL Big Six. I've been having a lot of fun with it, and I find it's a great creative tool that provides so much capability for my studio. I think you'll find the same. Be sure to check this out. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Click here for more videos like this, or start at sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs.